A warning to our listeners. This episode contains descriptions of domestic violence, substance abuse, and suicide. Listener discretion is advised.
Winter had arrived in Independence, Missouri by early December of 2017. The nights were long and the daylight faded fast. The sun dipped below the horizon just after 5 p.m. while the air hovered around freezing. In that cold hush of winter, the roadside motels that line U.S. Highway 40 had parking lots slick with frost or the faint sheen of ice. One such establishment, the Sports Stadium Motel. It sat in a part of town that became a different kind of neighborhood after dark, one where unspeakable things tended to take place. And for Libby Caswell, her experience was no different than countless others. On December 11, 2017, police were called to that very motel after a young woman was found dead inside room 319. Just 21 years old, a mother, a daughter, and someone who, by all accounts, had been fighting for a new start. Within hours, her death was ruled a suicide. But what investigators saw inside that room and what her family has uncovered in the years since has left many wondering if justice ever truly arrived for Libby.
We've covered cases like this before. Heather Turner, Ellen Greenberg, and countless other cases that we haven't covered of mysterious suicides and disappearances that go unaddressed for years. Unfortunately, this case is not much different.
Over the last 7 years, her family has begged for answers, calling for the investigation to be reopened. They believe Libby didn't take her own life, and that someone silenced her before she could finally break free. We're going to walk through what happened in room 319, what police may have missed, and do our best to uncover the truth. This is the story of Libby Caswell. I'm Ashley.
And I'm Ricky.
And this is Crime Salad.
Now, before we get started, make sure you're subscribed wherever you're listening. I know it's such a simple thing, but it truly helps us keep bringing these stories every week.
And if you're a listener on Apple Podcasts, leave us a quick positive review if you can. It really helps new listeners find us, and we appreciate it so much. Libby Caswell was born on March 25th, 1996, right in Independence. She was the beloved daughter of Robert and Cynthia Caswell, and even as a child, she had a mix of energy, talent, and warmth that drew people in. Her mom, Cindy, remembers how they used to play a game called Show Your Face. Cindy would say happy or surprised, and Libby would scrunch up her face, act it out, and burst into laughter. It's a memory her mother still holds on to that captures exactly who Libby was. At William Chrisman High School, Libby became known for her bright spirit and her incredible athleticism. She was a varsity cheerleader, a dedicated gymnast, and a 2-time Grand National champion. People who knew her said that she had a contagious enthusiasm that made every room lighter. Outside of sports, Libby had a love for dance and music, and she enjoyed playing guitar.
So it's pretty clear that Libby wasn't just gifted, she was driven. Everything about her early life shows someone with passion for performance, for creativity, and even for the people around her.
Yeah, and this level of caring was especially evident when her son was born. Xavier quickly became the center of Libby's world. But that love and light, all the promise who she could be, was cut short in the winter of 2017 when Libby's life came to a sudden and heartbreaking end inside of a small hotel room off Highway 40. On that night of December 11th, 2017, a call came into police dispatch around 8 p.m. Officers were sent to the Sports Stadium Motel after a call had come from Libby Caswell's boyfriend and father of her child, who told authorities that Libby hanged herself inside room 319. And when police arrived, they found the door locked, and they had to force their way inside. The room was in disarray, personal belongings scattered across the floor, the bathroom door was closed, and the lights were switched off. As police made their way through the room, they found their way to the bathroom. And when inside, officers discovered poor Libby lying motionless with a camouflage belt wrapped around her neck. She was lying between the toilet and the bathtub with her feet propped against the wall and blood coming out of her nose. Now, according to the police report, rigor mortis had already set in, suggesting she had been dead for several hours. Her boyfriend, Devin Martin, was nowhere to be found.
And that's such a weird aspect because he makes the 911 call and then he's nowhere to be found. He's not at the scene. He's not at the motel.
Right. But before we get into that, let's talk about who was at the scene. So in the room right next door, room 320, police talked to a man who said that he'd been woken up by what sounded like a fight coming from Libby's room. He told police he heard banging, like someone hitting the wall, and what sounded like a man and a woman arguing. Then he said he heard a woman's voice pleading, "Please stop hurting me." He told officers it had happened about 20 minutes before police arrived.
But that timeline doesn't make sense. When police found Libby, her body was already in rigor mortis according to reports, which typically begins 2 to 4 hours after death and can take up to 12 hours to become fully set in. If she had already been dead for several hours like investigators documented, there's no way she could have been fighting or screaming 20 minutes earlier.
So it's interesting because officers, they noted that the witness appeared impaired and his story shifted as they questioned him. Because of this, they didn't take him to the station for a recorded interview. He was considered unreliable and his statement wasn't pursued any further. But still, I think it's at least a first glance into the fact that something else might have been going on here. With no credible witnesses on the scene, investigators, they turned their attention back to the one person who called for help, Devin Martin.
Now, according to the transcripts of the 911 call, a male voice had called in to report that someone was hanging inside a motel room. The dispatcher asked if the belt could be loosened. The caller, who we now know is Devin Martin, replied that he didn't know how long Libby had been hanging and that he was outside of the room. Just after that, the call dropped. Even though the dispatcher tried to call back, there was no answer. But to the detective's surprise, the caller showed up to the station later that night around 10:45 p.m. to be interviewed.
So Devin, he told police that he and Libby checked into the motel around 6:30 that morning, though motel records show that they checked in at 7:10. And he said that they argued about his drug use before he laid down to take a nap, while Libby went to take a shower. He told detectives that he fell asleep around 11 a.m. and didn't wake up until 8 p.m. When he got up, he said Libby wasn't in the room. Then he noticed his camouflage belt hanging over the top of the closed bathroom door. When he opened it, he told police that Libby's body fell to the floor with the belt still around her neck. Now, investigators noted what looked like a fresh damage at the top of the bathroom door, consistent with the belt having been wedged there. And Devin said that he tried to loosen the belt, he couldn't find a pulse, and he freaked out. Instead of waiting for help, he left the motel, he called 911 while driving away, and he went to his father's house.
And that part doesn't sit right with a lot of people. And frankly, it doesn't sit right with me either. When someone finds a loved one unresponsive, the normal reaction is to stay and wait for first responders. And I don't want to judge the way anyone responds to a tragic situation like this, but it's just kind of strange to me that Devin drove off and didn't even talk to police about what happened for almost 3 hours.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know what he was doing or what he was thinking to go to his dad's house after he called.
Like, what type of conversation did they have there?
Right. Now, by the time he arrived, detectives were already looking at him as a person of interest. And during his interview, he told investigators that Libby had been depressed, making suicidal statements, and she had been drinking all day at the motel. He said he was exhausted from being up all night the night before, which is why he slept throughout the day at the motel, while allegedly Libby decided to commit suicide in the bathroom. Now, obviously, he denied any involvement in Libby's death.
Of course he did.
After Devin's interview that night, detectives spoke with another witness, a friend who had also been at the motel earlier that morning. Now, according to the report, he told investigators that he left the room hours before Libby was found. He said that Libby had been drinking vodka that morning and that she'd been talking about wanting to end her life, corroborating the story that Devin gave.
But that detail doesn't line up with the evidence. When the toxology report came back, it showed no alcohol in Libby's system. If Libby had really been drinking that morning, it should have showed up in her blood work, even if it had been hours. Alcohol metabolizes at about 0.015% per hour, depending on weight and liver function. So if she had been drinking heavily at 8 or 9 a.m. and she died several hours later, there would have still been trace amounts of alcohol in her system when the autopsy was done.
Right, and even in cases where the body isn't discovered for a few hours, the alcohol doesn't leave their system altogether. Postmortem ethanol can sometimes form naturally as the body decomposes, but that usually creates false positives, not negatives. In other words, if anything, you would expect to see some measurable amount, not none at all. So that could mean two things. Either Libby wasn't drinking that morning, or the timeline that was given to police is wrong. So there's a lot of confusion about this case from the very beginning.
And just to throw out some conspiracies that are floating around, it's possible, and I'm not saying this is what happened, but it's possible that during those 3 hours that police were looking for Devin, he could have met up with the other witness who was a friend of his to create that narrative of Libby displaying signs of suicidal thoughts and behaviors, if he really was trying to cover something up.
Right, and there are some people who have said this, and it will become clearer as we talk through this, that just like other cases, there were very strong signs that this incident was not a suicide. After interviewing Devin Martin and the others connected to this case, detectives began reviewing the available evidence, the photos from the scene, the damage to the bathroom door, and the physical items that had been collected. But there was one critical piece missing: the motel's surveillance footage. The Sports Stadium Motel was equipped with security cameras that covered the parking lots and the walkways outside the rooms. This footage could have shown who came and went from room 319 that day, confirming Devin's timeline or contradicting it entirely. But according to police, they ran into some issues locating and collecting the footage, a problem that they said left investigators without a key piece of evidence.
Now, police didn't specify exactly what happened to that footage, but in most motel systems, recordings automatically loop and overwrite themselves after a few days. So, if that follow-up came even slightly late, those files could have been lost by default. We can't say that's for sure what happened here, but by the time that investigators were looking for that footage, it was gone.
And if they had that footage, it would be one of the only ways to confirm what really happened outside the room. Now, in the days following the discovery of Libby Caswell's body, the Jackson County Medical Examiner's Office carried out an autopsy, concluding that the cause of death was asphyxia, a lack of oxygen to the body. However, in their report, they listed the manner of death as undetermined, meaning they could not definitively say whether Libby's death was a suicide, homicide, or an accident. But despite this, the Independence Police Department concluded it was a suicide, despite the medical examiner not reaching that determination. For Libby's family, this ruling felt like a red flag. Her mother, Cynthia Caswell, she said she had no reason to believe that Libby was suicidal, and she knew who did this to her daughter, Devin Martin, and his accomplice, Nicholas Gomez, the other man at the motel police had questioned, and who had supported Devin's version of events.
In a properly handled investigation, an undetermined manner of death would typically trigger deeper review, like additional forensic work, interviews, alternate hypotheses. But in this case, the police closed the file as suicide, and Cynthia, Libby's siblings, and the general public took big issue with this.
So Libby's case closed as a suicide. As you can imagine, this did not sit well with Libby's family. In the hours after Libby's death, officers from the Independence Police Department arrived at the scene and later informed her mother that Libby had taken her own life. But Cynthia did not believe that conclusion. She publicly said that Libby did not kill herself and began a long and grueling fight of proving this, mainly referring to her relationship with Devin Martin. In fact, there was a witness that came forward to tell police his own story about Libby and Devon's relationship. A week before Libby's death, on December 4th of 2017, another disturbing event took place. The witness had dated Devon's mother, reportedly, and told investigators that he was awakened by a commotion in his home. Devon and Libby had been staying with him temporarily while saving for an apartment. And when he got up to see what was going on, he said that he found Devon choking Libby. The witness later told investigators and the media that when he opened the door, he saw Devon strangling Libby while sitting on top of her. Surprised, he told the couple to leave his house immediately. And a week later, he heard that Libby was dead. He told reporters that he felt bad because maybe he shouldn't have made them leave.
So that right there is the first glimpse that we have of documented evidence of domestic violence in Libby and Devon's relationship, which we'll go into more detail about how this makes the case even more suspicious. But this guy can't blame himself for what happened to Libby. I mean, he was just trying to do the right thing.
Exactly. And throughout those years, Cynthia Caswell said Libby and Devon's relationship had been marked by turbulence from the very beginning. The two had met in high school, a varsity cheerleader and a football player. And for a time, it seemed like young love, but things quickly turned controlling and dangerous. Libby confided in her mom that Devon had become possessive and threatening. Cynthia said that when the couple stayed at her home, she could often hear them fighting behind closed doors. She suspected physical abuse, though Libby often made excuses for her bruises and other injuries. Over time, she noticed her daughter change. The bubbly, social teenager she once knew became quiet and withdrawn, almost as if she were scared of something or someone. And when Libby became pregnant with Xavier, Devon stopped showing up. He missed doctor appointments, skipped the baby's shower, and wasn't there for the birth. She told domestic shelters and later posted in family statements that he struggled with alcohol and drugs, disappearing for long stretches of time and reappearing when things fell apart. By 17, Libby had her child. Cynthia said the abuse and Devon's drug use continued, and eventually Libby began using too. During that time, Cynthia took over raising her grandson. Libby tried to end the relationship several times, but Devon would stalk her, driving past their house at all hours, yelling and even coming to the door wielding a hammer, demanding Libby to come outside and talk to him. Eventually, Cynthia secured an order of protection against him to protect herself, her daughter, and her grandson. But Devon violated it repeatedly. Each time, Cynthia called 911, hoping police would stop him. Instead, she said that the Independence Police Department labeled her home as a nuisance property and fined her $400. And if she called again, she would face more fines.
This is part of the case that really pissed me off. I mean, a nuisance property law is supposed to target places with repeated criminal activity or false alarms, not families calling for help during real domestic violence. Joe Bianco, a former San Diego detective with the Alliance for Hope International, told domestic shelters that these ordinances can unintentionally punish victims instead of protecting them, which, in my personal opinion, is exactly what happened here. This is the one group of people that are supposed to make you feel safe, yet they're punishing you for needing their help.
It's just so sad. Libby and her mother, maybe they lost faith that the police could protect them, or that the restraining order meant anything. Eventually, Libby went back to Devon, and the two bounced between friends' homes and motels. They never stayed anywhere long. Gail Strack, the CEO of the Alliance, later said that she believed that the nuisance violation may have been a breaking point, that Libby thought returning home would only put her family in danger. Cynthia struggled to understand why her daughter kept giving Devon more chances. She said she didn't understand the type of hold he had on her until she started to learn about different types of domestic violence. Libby would say she hated him, hated her life with him, and the next thing you know, she would be with him. Cynthia just didn't understand it, even though she was experiencing verbal abuse herself. So Libby, she grew up in a home marked by verbal abuse, and Cynthia admitted that it took her years to see that she was endured by abuse. saying that she was trying to be the peacemaker and trying to make her family stay together. And it wasn't until Libby's death that she finally left her marriage for good and began to realize that what her and Libby were going through wasn't too different from each other.
And sadly, that pattern is trauma repeating itself from one generation to the next. And it's something experts see all the time. People normalize what they grow up around, even when it's dangerous.
In Devin's childhood, it wasn't free from violence either. His mother told journalist Melissa Jeltsin, who hosted a podcast titled What Happened to Libby Caswell, that both she and Devin's father struggled with drug addiction and abuse. His mother said that she knew that Devin saw some things he shouldn't have seen, which were likely traumatic. And this isn't an excuse at all for the way that he treated Libby, but it's just adding to your point at perpetuating what you see around you as a child. Despite these struggles, caseworkers later confirmed that in the months before her death, Libby had been sober, attending parenting classes, and working towards stable housing so she could regain custody of her son. By 2016, Libby's family said that the couple had gotten engaged. They bought a car together, and they talked about starting over. But within months, Devin reportedly emptied Libby's bank account, changed her passwords, and took the car to leave town with another woman. Eventually, he was arrested and put in jail. And when Devin got out, Libby was trying to move forward. She had a steady job, a roommate to help with bills, and she was rebuilding her credit and sobriety. But Devin returned, breaking into her apartment and stealing from her. Her family said that Libby told them she was terrified.
And that's when her mother made a hard decision to call Child Protective Services, not out of punishment, but out of fear. Cynthia said she wanted her daughter to have a safe way out of the relationship.
And that decision marked a turning point. By late 2017, Libby was working with family services programs, and she tested negative on every drug screen. She was allowed supervised visits with her son again and was taking classes to regain full custody. Her mother said she was proud. Libby was finally in recovery. She was sober and trying to separate herself from all of this chaos. Her caseworkers said that Libby did not appear suicidal, which makes Devin's account of what he says happened that December morning all the more perplexing. Records also showed that during the December 4th incident at the witness's home, Libby told her caseworker that Devin had tried to strangle her, corroborating what this witness had reported to investigators. The caseworkers urged Libby to seek help from a domestic violence shelter, but she declined.
And all of this was ample evidence that put pressure and suspicion on Devin's story of what happened. But the case was closed and there was nothing more to do.
Right. Now, apparently, Devin Martin, he was interviewed a second time a year later when he was in jail on an unrelated crime. And still, he denied any involvement in what happened. So the case stalled. But Cynthia Caswell wasn't going to accept this. So she, along with friends and family, began advocating for her case on the Justice for Libby Facebook group, sharing updates, coordinating advocacy, and pushing for the case to be reopened. Some users defended Libby's boyfriend, while others shared firsthand accounts of his violence. Then, in 2020, Libby's sister posted a lengthy public statement addressing those defending Devin. In it, she wrote that anyone who hadn't lived with him or called the police on him so many times for his violence against Libby and his own son had no right to defend him. She said that their family had personally witnessed assaults, including one instance where Devin sat on her, laughing while she was screaming for him to get off because she couldn't breathe.
This post outlined years of alleged violence. Her sister said that Devin had been caught strangling Libby a week before she died, had broken objects in the home, and had threatened both Libby and her son. She also wrote that after Libby's death, people close to him claimed he admitted to what happened, but that others were too afraid to come forward because of threats.
And this post ended with a warning to anyone still defending him, calling Devin a killer and saying, "Don't go crying, saying no one warned you when he does something to you and your family." So everyone in Libby's life was very aware of how Devin had treated her before her death. and they weren't going to let anyone else say otherwise. By April of 2021, Libby's former boyfriend was behind bars, serving time for an unrelated crime. And as the family continued to push for justice, their efforts began to draw renewed media attention. When 41 Action News interviewed Independence Police Captain Mike Onka, he said that the case had raised red flags for him from the very beginning. He told reporters, "That's why I kept reopening it." So there wasn't total agreement in the department about how Libby's death should have been classified. Captain Onka said that at first, police were working it as a strangulation case, but that a representative from the medical examiner's office on scene insisted it was a suicide, causing the results that we have today.
Right, and that's why the case stalled. There wasn't anything solid, according to investigators, to connect Devin to anything, and the initial medical examiner insisted that it was a suicide. It definitely helps us understand how they reached that conclusion, but it still doesn't move Libby's case forward.
Exactly. So by December of 2023, 6 years after Libby's death, her name was once again being spoken from the steps of the Eastern Jackson County Courthouse. On a cold Monday morning, family and friends gathered with signs, photos, and candles, demanding justice for the 21-year-old, who they believe was murdered. And that same day, Alliance for Hope International released the results of a nearly 4-year independent review conducted by its forensic team, known as the Justice Project. Their conclusion was very clear. The Independence Police Department had poorly investigated Libby's case. Gerald Feynman, a retired prosecutor working with Justice Project, he said that he reviewed Libby's case alongside hundreds of law enforcement officers, prosecutors, and forensic experts, and they all reached the same conclusion. Libby Caswell was murdered. According to Feynman, investigators in 2017 had accepted what witnesses told them about corroboration. They took at face value exactly what all the suspects in the case had said, and they never tried to check it against facts or other statements. But the Independence Police Department responded that several detectives had re-reviewed the file and interviewed witnesses at the scene. But their conclusion had not changed. Libby's death remained a suicide. Casey Gwynn, a president of the Alliance for Hope International, said their forensic team had examined Libby's autopsy photographs and found evidence of extensive injuries, bruises across her body, scratches, and most strikingly, multiple ligature marks around her neck and her chest. This confirms and adds to all the evidence of domestic violence here, which, from hearing Cynthia's story, it just makes sense.
Exactly. And from a forensic standpoint, normally a death by hanging will show a singular ligature mark, a clear place where the body was suspended, and often a gap under the knot or suspicion point. But when there's multiple marks and they appear on the chest as well, not to mention having multiple bruises, that raises the question, was this staged to look like a suicide? And in Libby's case, the forensic team said, yeah. And honestly, I would too. She wouldn't have strangled herself multiple times, and she wouldn't have left bruises on herself before she died.
Yes, and Feynman went further. And I'm about to talk about more details from her autopsy, so if you're sensitive to that, skip ahead. The Justice Project found clear signs that Libby was strangled to death. There was even a footprint on Libby's back, which was evidence that she was strangled from behind, using the belt as a pressure instrument to restricting her breathing. She didn't hang herself, and the evidence is clear on that. For Libby's family, the report was validation after years of grief, advocacy, and disbelief, the clearest confirmation that they weren't wrong to keep fighting for her.
And if we're looking at this statistically, strangulation is one of the most dangerous predictors of future homicide in domestic violence cases. A study published in the Journal of Emergency Medicine found that women who survive strangulation by their partners are 7 times more likely to later become the victims of an attempted homicide, and 7.5 times more likely to be killed by that same partner.
Right, which is what makes this conclusion so alarming. If there was documented evidence that Libby had been strangled before, as witnesses and her caseworker reported, that act alone should have flagged her as being a risk for lethal violence. But the IPD still closed her case without further investigation. For Cindy Caswell, she said that she believes corruption played a role in how her daughter's case was handled. She told reporters that she thought there was corruption all along. The hotel is a known drug and sex trafficking area, and according to her, it's kind of allowed to happen. She said that the IPD knew it went on and allowed it to happen, connecting it to some kind of corruption between the police and the hotel. This is obviously a pretty big conspiracy, but as time has gone on, the idea has sounded less and less crazy to Libby's mother. Whether or not corruption was involved, it's clear that the trust between Cindy and the Independence Police Department was breaking. And after 6 years, she believes the only reason Libby's story is still being told is because she's refused to stop fighting. After the Justice Project's report was released, both the forensic team and Libby's family publicly urged the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office to request an independent investigation by an outside law enforcement agency. But the concern wasn't about Libby's case. Gerald Feynman, the retired prosecutor who led the review, said he believed this kind of premature suicide ruling could be a part of a wider problem.
Yeah, and he said he thought that IPD made this ruling so quickly because it would end their investigation. And Feynman thinks that's occurred in other cases, 2 of which they're aware of, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute.
Standing beside Libby's family that morning was her longtime friend, Jessica Moraine, who said that it was time that someone stepped forward and owned up to what happened and that they get justice because Libby's family deserves it. In the wake of the Justice Project's findings and the public rally outside the courthouse, both the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office and the Independence Police Department released official statements addressing the case. The prosecutor's office said that they worked closely with the Independence Police Department and also other law enforcement partners to review the death of Libby Caswell on December 11th of 2017. They said their sympathies went out to her family who wished to know what happened to their loved one. They also said that the prosecutor's office reassigned a second veteran prosecutor to review the case a second time, but determined that the evidence was insufficient to justify criminal charges for multiple reasons. The prosecutor's determination and findings were communicated to a family member earlier that year. They ended their statement by saying that they have worked diligently to determine how Libby's life ended and whether criminal charges were supported, and that they would continue to look at any new evidence. So they confirmed that they assigned a second attorney to review the file, and the Independence Police Department released its own statement that day as well.
Yeah, and they basically gave a summary of their investigation that night in December. They explained how they held the scene until detectives could interview witnesses, and once investigators determined there was no need to hold the scene and no arrests were appropriate, the scene was released. However, the investigation continued. The case was reviewed by multiple detectives within the Criminal Investigations Unit. At one time, the case was reopened at the request of Libby's family and Alliance for Hope International. And according to the IPD, during that investigation, the FBI gave assistance.
And after that reopening, the case was presented again to the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office to determine if there were any criminal charges to be filed. However, detectives still believed that, given the evidence that was available, Libby's death was most likely a suicide. But they also welcomed any investigation by an independent party regarding the case. So, standing their ground on their ruling, but saving face by saying that they're open to processing new evidence.
Basically, they're covering their own butts.
Right. And by 2024, the ripple effect of Libby Caswell's case was undeniable. Since launching the Justice Project, Alliance for Hope International had been inundated with cases just like hers. Domestic violence victims found dead and their deaths ruled as suicides, despite evidence suggesting otherwise.
And that's where those other 2 cases that I mentioned earlier come in. The group had first reviewed the Terry Chavo case and then Stacy Feldman's, a Colorado woman whose death was initially ruled accidental until the Justice Project helped push for the case to be reopened 3 years later. Her husband was eventually convicted and the case was featured on Dateline.
Gail Strack, the CEO of the Alliance, said that their team is now reviewing about 20 cases across the U.S., most of them tied to intimate partner violence, and nearly all of their work is done pro bono, at no cost to the families. Actually, they're overwhelmed with cases. But Strack said that their goal is for law enforcement to come to them before the case is mishandled. Strack also explained that staged crime scenes most often appear in domestic violence contexts, saying that stranger homicide perpetrators don't need to do that. They're just going to take off. It's more likely that a domestic violence defendant is going to stage a crime scene because they know that they're going to be a main suspect.
The Alliance for Hope has also offered annual training called Hidden Homicides, the challenges of overcoming staged crime scenes. It's designed to help law enforcement, detectives, medical examiners, advocates, and journalists realize when a scene that looks like a suicide might actually be a homicide.
And they've identified 10 red flag factors that can point to a suspicious death in a domestic violence context. The victim dies prematurely. It looks like a suicide or an accident scene. One partner wanted to end the relationship. There is a prior history of domestic violence. The victim is found dead in their home or residence. The victim is found by a current or former partner. There is a prior history of strangulation or suffocation against the same partner. The partner was the last to see the victim alive. The partner has control of the crime scene, and the scene appears to have been altered in some way. And in Libby's case, advocates have said that those warning signs were everywhere. A prior history of strangulation, a relationship that was ending, a death scene that looked like a suicide, but it didn't quite add up, at the admission of someone from the police department and a partner who was the last to see her alive. Gerald Feynman said that one of the biggest mistakes investigators make in these kinds of cases is failing to ask if the facts actually make sense together. Early on, law enforcement is told this is a suicide. They have confirmation bias that everything looks like a suicide, and then they compound it. Everything they do is designed to confirm it instead of looking at it like a blank slate.
Now, we're not claiming that this is what happened here, but it's important to know how common this can be with domestic violence cases.
Right, and even though Libby's case is closed, the team at Alliance for Hope International said that they're not giving up, and they're going to continue applying, in their words, not so gentle, relentless pressure. For Cynthia Caswell, that same determination is just as strong. She said in 2024 that she feels like she sees Libby, alone, scared, calling out to her. Libby still called her mommy at 21, and they can't just do this to her. Cynthia also said in 2024 that after years of fear and frustration, she's ready to leave independence behind. She said, "I want the heck out of here. Everywhere I go, it's memories, and I'm still a little worried about standing up against the police department. I'm never going to call them, so I don't feel like I have a police department. I feel like I'm in danger."
And honestly, why wouldn't she be afraid of them? She was literally fined for asking for help.
Yeah, from calling the police department over the years. I wouldn't feel safe either. And Devin Martin, meanwhile, had refused to speak with media. Cindy said he doesn't see his son and has never shown up to take a DNA test that would have added his name to the birth certificate. And at 10 years old, Xavier was asking questions about his father and mother. Cindy said they began family therapy to help him understand, but no movements in Libby's case. And speaking of Devin Martin, he wasn't doing well at staying out of the spotlight. In June of 2024, Libby's family posted an update to their Justice for Libby Facebook page. Her former boyfriend was wanted in connection with a kidnapping in Calhoun, Missouri. According to the Henry County Sheriff's Office, Martin abducted his 4-year-old biological son from a different mother, from his grandmother's home on June 12th. And authorities said that Devin had no parental rights. He was believed to be armed and was known to assault law enforcement. By that evening, the Henry County Sheriff's Office confirmed that the child had been safely recovered in Sedalia by his grandmother and that Devin was no longer with the child. And this doesn't do anything to point to his guilt in Libby's case, but it proves what kind of guy this is just by the description that police gave during this incident. And as for the Independence Police Department, they weren't doing so great in the public eye either. In December of 2024, 1 year after the Justice Project's findings were released, the IPD hosted a public relation event meant to highlight the department's progress. And during that event, a police spokesperson reportedly told the audience that victims caused their own demise. And what a slap in the face.
Especially when they're already under scrutiny for mishandling Libby's case. And Libby's family, they used this to advocate for the police reform that they believe is needed in Independence. And honestly, I don't blame them. What even possesses you to say something like that?
It's very hurtful, especially to Libby's family, to hear something like that. These are people who are meant to protect the community. Now, unfortunately, and not surprising, by May of 2025, there was yet another chapter in the story of Devin Martin, but it again had nothing to do with Libby's case. On May 14th, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District of Missouri announced that he had been sentenced to 11 years in federal prison without parole. According to court documents, Martin had pleaded guilty in November of 2024 to felon in possession of a firearm. Investigators said that on June 19th of 2024, he was found carrying a stolen Smith & Wesson pistol loaded with 12 rounds in the magazine and one in the chamber. And police said that they've been conducting surveillance to arrest him on felony and parole violation warrants. And when they moved in, he ran, dropping the loaded pistol during the chase. He was also found with methamphetamine and fentanyl, totaling roughly 9 grams. And because of his previous felony convictions, including resisting arrest, drug distribution, theft, and tampering with monitoring equipment, Martin was barred from owning a firearm. The U.S. Attorney's Office confirmed that the case was prosecuted federally with assistance from none other than the Independence Police Department.
And the most amazing part of this is that Cynthia and Natalie, Libby's mother and sister, attended his sentencing.
Yes, they did. In a post to Libby's Facebook page, Cynthia wrote that as Devin entered the courtroom, he was chained from his hands to his ankles. He looked much older than he should at 29 years old, I'm assuming due to his drug use. First, he saw his mother, his sister, and his brother. And when he saw Cynthia and Natalie, he did a double take. Cynthia described how the state attorney told the court that Devin had been reckless, dangerous, and unable to change. Since he was 15 years old, he'd cycle through detention centers, jails, and prisons with a long record of drug use, theft, and violence. He has never gotten out on parole and turned it around for good. He always went right back to drugs and crime. Cynthia said that Libby was working on getting her GED right before she was murdered, and she said that Devin ruined that for her by stirring up trouble in her classes. Libby was doing everything she could to get her life in order, but he would always enter and destroy her dreams. And it's because of him Libby gets no second chances. Cynthia said that she would continue to pursue justice for Libby, and Devin's abuse will never be forgotten. Her voice will speak for her because he took her voice away. She added that Devin's parental rights to their son, Xavier, were permanently terminated by the state of Missouri, something she was so thankful for, because Xavier would not be exposed to the drugs or lifestyle his father leads. Cynthia said she will fight for Devin to face a jury for murder and be put in prison for the rest of his life. He doesn't deserve a second chance because Libby will never get her second chance.
I mean, that woman's been fighting for almost 10 years, trying to raise her grandson, who's now asking how his mother died. And she still doesn't know. I don't know how she keeps going.
Exactly, me either. But she still is. And the Justice for Libby Facebook page is still very active, collaborating with the Alliance for Hope International and sharing more cases that the organization is highlighting. She's become such a huge advocate for deaths with a history of domestic violence, and she's also been advocating for eliminating her view of police corruption. On October 8th of 2025, the city of Independence announced plans to close what it called problem motels, properties that had become hubs for crimes and constant police calls. At the top of that list was the Sports Stadium Motel on US 40, the same place where Libby Caswell was found dead 8 years earlier. City data showed that police responded to the motel 343 times in 2023 and 2024 for everything from domestic disturbances and drug calls to stolen vehicles and welfare checks. Between 2018 and 2021, officers had been called there more than 800 times.
Which is absolutely insane. And the city said closing those motels would free officers to handle other calls, which I can't believe it took them almost a decade to pick up on this problem. I mean, Cynthia mentioned it as a known hub for crime as far back as 2023.
Right, and she was right there advocating for closing it. She told KSHB 41 News how her daughter died in a cold, horrible, dirty room with no help, saying that she was a statistic of that motel, and it makes her sick that the crime at that motel had gone on for so long. Other people interviewed by the news outlet said that people knew what those motels were used for, and they had become a hub for crime and violence. So the fact that this and other motels were being taken down was a big step forward. The city can't ignore anymore what happened there. As of today, Libby's family is planning a press conference for December of this year on the 11th in front of the courthouse in Independence to continue advocating for Libby's case. They hope that everyone that knew Libby and knows about her case will be there to support their fight for justice. If you have any information about the death of Libby Caswell, you can contact the Independence Police Department or reach out to Alliance for Hope International's Justice Project, which continues to review cases of domestic violence deaths across the country. You can also follow the Justice for Libby Facebook page to stay up to date on the efforts to bring awareness to Libby's case.
And if you or someone you know is experiencing abuse, help is available. You can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE.
Thank you all so much for listening to Crime Salad. And before we close tonight's episode, we want to end with a letter written by Libby's son. It's been years now, but I still talk to you. I talk to you when I'm alone in the car. I talk to you when I see something I know would make you smile. And I talk to you on the nights when my ache in my chest is too much to carry. I was 4 when you left. They told me you were gone, but I didn't understand. I waited by the door for you to come home. I thought maybe you had just gone to the store. I know now what happened. I know you stayed because you loved him. You thought you could fix the hurt inside him. You gave him everything you had, your love, your patience, your whole heart. But his anger was bigger than your love. And one night, he took you from me. Mom, I wish I could have saved you. I wish I could have told you it wasn't your job to carry his pain. I wish I had more than 4 short years with you. I'm older now, but I still feel like that little boy standing at the window, waiting for his mom to come home. Love always, your son.